All right, how's everyone doing out there? Welcome to my channel. This is a channel for educational purposes, and today is our 310th video on the reciprocal system of theory from Mr. Dewey Bernard Larson. And Mr. Larson wrote up his two fundamental postulates for the reciprocal system back in the late 1950s. The first one is the most important, and that one says, more or less, that we live in a universe that is made entirely of motion. Not matter, like the ancient Greeks said up to all the classical philosophers and physicists, or energy, like some of the Einsteinians, but motion. And for Larson, motion was the relationship between space and time. And that sets up a generalized reciprocal relationship between space and time. Space and time are basically identical, except that they are reciprocals of one another, just in the same way that 3 1/3 are reciprocals of one another. And Larson's first postulate articulates three main qualities of space and time. One is that they are coordinate, meaning that they have 3 dimensions, or at least they have aspects that have 3 dimensions. And another is that they are like clocks. Time is always getting later and later and later, but in no specific direction. And space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart, but in no specific direction. And that was actually observed by the Hubble telescope, that observed that all of the distant galaxies are moving away from each other. You can envision this using a balloon with dots on it. And you blow up the balloon, all of the dots are moving away from each other, but in no specific direction. Larson calls this a scalar motion, and he calls the general phenomena clock space and clock time. So there's coordinate space and coordinate time, and there's clock space and clock time, and then there is the discrete unit postulate, which in this case means that both time and space are quantized, meaning that they have a minimum unit of space and time. There's a minimum, and if you go below that minimum, then you don't have that phenomena. If you don't have a full unit of space, you don't have space. And that full unit of space is approximately 4.56 times 10 to the minus 8 meters. So, 1/20 millionth of a meter. And then you also have the quantum of time. 1 full unit of time. If you don't have that, you don't have time. And that is even ridiculously small. 1.52 times 10 to the minus 16 seconds. If you have 1 unit of space in 1 unit of time, you have the speed of light, which Larson refers to as unit speed. 1/1 equals 1. That's the speed of light. And the speed of light then is really the background of the universe, or the state of rest of the universe, the progression of the natural reference system, the reference system of the universe. You make your measurements from the speed of light, faster or slower than the speed of light. That means that half of the universe is actually moving faster than the speed of light. Larson refers to this as the cosmic sector. And this is taboo for the scientists out there who believe in Einstein's dictum that says that the speed of light is the maximum speed of the universe. Larson says the whole half of the universe is moving faster than the speed of light. And then there is the material sector, which is the sector that we're used to dealing with, where the speed of light is the maximum speed, where all the action is less than the speed of light. And so there's the material sector and the cosmic sector. And they are the same, except that they are reciprocals of one another. You have to interchange the roles of space and time, and they would be the same. So in the material sector, you have coordinate space, 3 dimensions of space, and you have clock time. The clock is always getting later and later and later. In the cosmic sector, you have coordinate time, 3 dimensions of time, and you have clock space. Space is always getting farther and farther and farther apart. And so when you cross that speed of light boundary, which you can under certain circumstances, in particular if you are a giant star or galaxy, then that's what happens. You switch and you move into coordinate time instead of coordinate space, or vice versa. Now, Larson took those three prongs of his first postulate along with his second postulate, which basically says that the universe conforms to the relationships of ordinary commutative mathematics, and its absolute magnitudes are, or its primary magnitudes are absolute, and its geometry is Euclidean. And he then derived a theoretical universe from that, and then began writing his books based on his theoretical universe. What is in the universe based strictly on these postulates? And strictly from theory, he was able to deduce a great many qualities of the universe that actually agree with the scientific observations and measurements that have been made over the centuries. Now, there is a small area of what you would call relativistic, the very fast and the very small and the very large, where Larson's findings diverge from classical mechanics, but just in the same way that Einstein's did. But in general, if Einstein is able to provide some kind of solutions, he was not always able to provide the reasons for these things. Einstein would, something like where he's talking about the ether, he just says, well, we'll just call it something else, or we'll just call it this and not worry too much about the meaning of the statement. Where Larson improves upon, the Einsteinians is generally, and the quantum mechanists, is that he tells you why. He gives you the concepts. The scientists generally have the numbers correct, but they have the math correct, but they don't have the concepts correct. And in some cases, they, like Heisenberg, would actually, where he's talking about his uncertainty principle and talking about some of the quantum mechanics, he and the statistical, breakdown there is basically saying that these phenomena have no meaning. They don't mean anything. They just, that's just how it is, but Larson is providing the actual concepts that back these things up. So Larson was able to write his books on various topics, but especially chemistry and physics and astronomy, and some economics and philosophy even, and religion and psychology and biology. And he developed a few few dedicated followers, one of whom is Dr. KVK Nehru. And we are going to read from one of the articles that Dr. Nehru wrote that is, I believe it's called Multidimensional Space-Time. And I believe this is the third installment that we've read. So if you want to go back to the beginning of the article, go back a couple episodes. But we're going to start right in the middle here. And hopefully this is one of Nehru's attempts to kind of clear up some of the various points that Larson makes in some of his books. And I know that one point that he's talking about here is the non-locality idea, where the quantum mechanists just kind of say that these things are non-local but don't really say why. Nehru and Larson are able to explain, where you're getting non-locality because you have two different frames of reference. You have your spatial frame and you have your temporal frame. Three-dimensional space, three-dimensional time. And the directions in space have nothing to do with the directions in time. And so when you cross over from time, from three-dimensional time into three-dimensional space, you don't have any specific location that you cross into. Instead, you cross into it non-locally and at a very, very low intensity. That is what explains the cosmic microwave background radiation at only 3 degrees Kelvin. Also, what I didn't mention is that there are 2 other separate borderlines. Okay, you've got the unit speed boundary, the speed of light that's between the material and cosmic sectors. Also, within the material sector, you have what's called the time region. And the time region is when you don't have a full unit of space. If you don't have a full unit of space, then you don't have space because of the discrete unit postulate. And then if you don't have space, then it has to be time, because the universe is made out of motion, and motion is the relationship between space and time. And so it has to be one or the other or both. And if it's not one, it's got to be the other. So this is the realm of the time region, or this is the realm of time. And this is having to do with microscopic phenomena like atoms and molecules, less than 1 unit of space. And if you don't have a full unit of time over in the cosmic sector, the same thing happens, and you are only dealing with space. And so you're in the space region. And so in addition to this unit speed boundary, you have a unit space boundary and you have a unit time boundary. And when you cross those boundaries, the rules also invert, and you're dealing with a realm of the opposite frame. Okay, we're going to start here with Nehru. We should conceive of the influence of the cosmic control units to be non-local, without trying to posit them at locations in the time-space region. Perhaps the expression motion in space of the cosmic unit has an unwarranted pun with the expression motion in space of a material unit of the time-space region. The time-space region is somewhat clumsily named, I suppose, but it's referring to the material sector, but the outside region of the material sector, not in the time region, but the time-space region. So in the cosmic sector, it's called the space-time region and the space region. So you have basically 4 regions. You could just call it the material sector, the outside, the material sector, the outside region of the material sector. Okay, so motion in space of a material unit of the time-space region, which prompts us to liken them. But these two are not the same. While the former ranges from 0 to -1, the latter from 0 to 1. Okay, so he's contrasting here the motion in space. I'm a little confused. We'll go on. That's pretty much how at least I've studied the reciprocal system. If I don't understand it, I just go on. And I pick up what I can pick up, and then I try to pick up the pieces later. Because otherwise you could get stuck and fixated on one thing. You want to do this in a broad stroke. You want to cover as much ground as you possibly can with the reciprocal system, because that's what you need. You need to be able to see how he's applying the same principles and the same concepts for every different subject. And when you see that, then you can kind of see the consistencies, and maybe you can come back later and try to figure this one out because you're going to be able to get a boost from some other field, and maybe it'll give you some insight, and then you'll be able to grasp this one. So that's generally what I do with the reciprocal system. If I don't get it, I just move on. And you have to some extent sustain your ambivalence and suspend your disbelief. But these two are not the same. While the former ranges from 0 to -1, the latter from 0 to +1. Motion in space only means that the relevant quantity is the speed, and motion in time means that the relevant quantity is the inverse speed. From this, it follows that the matter with which a cell could be built should be within the time region. That is, it has to be either in the solid state or in the liquid state, or a combination of them. Similarly, the cosmic matter of the control unit has to be either in the inverse solid state or in the inverse liquid state, since it has to be in the corresponding space region. Now, that is how Larson is delineating solid, liquid, vapor, and gas. And a solid, that means that all 3 dimensions are in the time region. A liquid, 2 dimensions are 1 dimension has gotten outside of the time region. With a vapor, 2 dimensions have gotten outside of the time region, and then with a gas, all 3 dimensions have gotten outside the time region. And they all, I don't know if Larson says this, but they all are basically separated by a 90-degree angle. So first you have the solid, and then it flattens to be a liquid, like a plane, and then the vapor has it rising up, and then the gas has it radiating out. Then in the cosmic region, you have what are called inverse gas, inverse vapor, inverse liquid, and inverse solid. And those Dr. Bruce Perret has been able to identify different phenomena that would fill those descriptions. Okay, remembering that a solid has fixed boundaries in 3 space and a liquid variable boundaries, we wonder whether in the corresponding cases of the inverse solid, it has fixed boundaries in 3 time and the inverse liquid variable boundaries. The implications in the case of inverse liquid would be more tantalizing. Now, while in a crystal of ordinary matter, we have repetition in space. In the corresponding case of a crystal of the matter of the cosmic sector, we have repetition in time. Such a structure, a temporal structure as against a spatial structure, therefore appears to us as a cyclical process. The periodical separation of the polynucleotide strands and their replication is just the sort of a job a crystal of the matter of the cosmic sector is capable of doing. So he's making the bridge toward life here, DNA. And this is called the theory of living systems. Just to demonstrate how organismic biology is catching up with what Larson explained in his Beyond Space and Time book, let us quote, which I read in its entirety about 3-4 months ago. So if you go back, I did about 90 videos on the book Beyond Space and Time, which I labeled, we should be able to find it back in the archives. Let us quote from Fritjof Capra, The Web of Life. The central insight of the Santiago theory is the identification of cognition, the process of knowing, with the process of life. Cognition, according to Maturana and Varela, is the activity involved in the self-generation and self-perpetuation of autopoietic networks. In other words, cognition is the very process of life. In this new view, cognition involves the entire process of life, including perception, emotion, and behavior, and does not necessarily require a brain and a nervous system. The Santiago theory of cognition, I believe, is the first scientific theory that overcomes the Cartesian division of mind and matter, and will thus have the most far-reaching implications. Mind and matter no longer appear to belong to 2 separate categories, but can be seen as representing 2 complementary aspects of the phenomenon of life: the process aspect and the structure aspect. At all levels of life, beginning with the simplest cell, mind and matter, process and structure are inseparably connected. Mind is immanent in living matter as the process of self-organization. Self-organization is an important finding. We explained, quote, in the long history of biological evolution, we see a gradual building up of structural complexity and a concomitant functional proliferation, successive levels and a concomitant functional proliferation. Successive levels of organization of matter from a hierarchy in which any given level contains all lower levels as components and is itself a component of all higher levels. Succeeding levels are structurally more complex than lower ones, inasmuch as a given level combines the complexities of all lower levels and has an additional complexity of its own. We need to make two important observations at this juncture. Something entirely new happens at a supervening level of organization, and this event is not explainable in terms of the lower level. A tissue, for example, is more than the sum of its cells. There is thus a leap between levels, gaps or transcendences in the evolutionary process. There is no purely logical explanation of this situation with present understanding of the relation between the levels could not be, with present understanding, the relation between the levels could not be predicted. Secondly, in this organizational picture, the myriad entities comprising nature are living entities that are both interdependent and autonomous to a degree. They are both wholes and parts of larger wholes. In its self-assertive, autonomous role, each entity is intent upon its self-consummation, whereas in its role as subsidiary part, each entity is capable of transcending itself in the interest of the greater whole. There is apparently a dynamic balance to be maintained between autonomy and submission to the needs of the next higher whole in the hierarchy. Through sacrifice, cooperation, and self-transcendence, something new occurs at the next higher level. The latter does not represent merely an aggregate of units of the lower level. Rather, it represents a new form, whole or unity, which is greater than the sum of its parts. The ancient wisdom points out that concomitant with the evolution of forms, which alone is studied by the scientist, there is an evolution of life and consciousness, which express themselves through these evolving forms. The more advanced the form is, the more the potentialities of consciousness that can manifest through it. In fact, it is the impetus from the evolving life that drives the evolution of organismic forms. Consciousness is relatively dormant in the material kingdom. It acquires the power to respond with feelings in the plant kingdom. It adds a new dimension of consciousness in the case of the animal kingdom, namely that of thinking. Only in the human kingdom does it begin to flower into the dimensions of creative activity and into intuition. Direct experiencing of the unity of all life, order, in nature, and pure love characterizes this new dimension of consciousness. When developed, we shall refer to this as the consciousness of ethical man. And I guess where he's saying man here, he's really referring to this very broadly. I don't think he's saying that humans are the only ethical men or potential ethical men. Okay, I think we're going to end it there and start tomorrow with this section called Motion Consciousness Continuum. Okay, so, but the basic idea, is that life is the result of a combination of a material unit and a cosmic unit. And they need to be in the right configuration, in the right proportions. Otherwise, they just annihilate each other. And those are, Larson covers that more in Beyond Space and Time. But here Nehru is just breaking it down according to some of the ancient philosophies and in terms of different levels of it and where this might be coming from, the inverse solid and inverse liquid, where you've got a repetition, and repetition would be a cyclical thing. And Larson says that too, that it's a spinning apparatus that enables, that it is the kind of thing that's needed by a material structure to bring it to life. Okay, we will leave it there, and thanks for tuning in. Have a great